What's up everyone? Today we're making a wooden mallet out of walnut and white oak. Let's check it out. What's up everyone? I'm Mitch and you're watching Made by Mitch, where I show you the things I make and what I learned making them. I do a lot of DIY and different type of projects because I believe that anyone can make. So if you're new, consider subscribing. So a while back I made my first mallet as a gift for my dad, and I learned a lot of stuff when I was making it, but I didn't really have time to film the process. So I wanted to make another mallet. That way I could show you what I did and adjust a couple things to try some new things. Let's get to it. So I started off with two rough cut pieces, one walnut and one white oak. And I had to mill them down to size. So the first thing I did was run the boards through the planer multiple times until I got it to the thickness that I wanted. And then I used my joiner jig for the table saw to straighten up one side of the board. And then after I got that side straight, I put that side against the fence and cut the boards to the width of what my mallet would be. The size of my mallet head ended up being 3.5 inches wide by 6.5 inches long. So next I used the crosscut sled to cut all the different pieces for my mallet head. So I messed up a little bit. I initially was going to make the handle and the inside part of the mallet out of oak, and I cut this piece too short, so now I don't have enough for my handle. So I had this extra piece of walnut that I'm going to use for the handle. I think it's going to be long enough. So the inside of the mallet's going to be oak, and then the outside is going to be walnut, and then it's also now going to have a walnut handle. So lesson learned. So 1.5 inches is a little too thick, so I'm going to go down to 1.25 inches. See how that feels. That's better. Okay, so I've got everything lined up how I want it to be. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate these side pieces just a little bit. That way whenever I go to drive the wedge in between the handle, it has a little bit of play to expand. The first time I tried this, I didn't do this and it made it really challenging, and I didn't even think I was going to be able to fasten it all together. So I'm going to try this out, we'll see how it works. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue these side pieces on, and then once that dries I'll go in and glue the top part on, then we'll move to the next step. While that was drying, I went ahead and moved on to the handle, and I made this small jig to make some curves for the end of the handle. I'm making these curve cuts so that way I can drive a wedge in the end of the handle to keep it tight in the mallet head once it's all assembled. My table saw blade didn't go as high as I needed it to go, so I finished it off using a jigsaw, and this worked perfect. Honestly, if you don't have a table saw, you could use a jigsaw for this entire process. It worked great. Next, I had to drill a small hole at the end of the curve so that way they wouldn't split whenever I drove the wedge into them. Looks like this is dry and ready to go, so now we're going to attach the top. The rest of the mallet head was drying. I went ahead and cut the wedges that would go in the top of the mallet. Now I cut several of these, and to get the angle that I wanted, I just wedged a board underneath the piece I was cutting, and that gave me the angle that I needed. Everything should be dry now, so I'm going to take off the clamps and start sanding everything down. Let's check it out. Okay, so I know I'm right in the middle of this cut right now you're watching, and I wanted to let you know that this is not the way you're supposed to use a circular saw, so please don't do it this way unless you feel extremely comfortable with doing so. I tried to figure out a way to clamp the board so that way I could have a better angle on it, and I didn't really get that, but I wanted to make this disclaimer that way you didn't try it and hurt yourself. So only do it this way if you're completely comfortable, but you need to use a miter saw for this. I wanted to make sure that I said that before I moved any further with this cut, so let's get back to it. Go. So a couple things real quick while I'm thinking of it. The first thing, remember when I tilted the inside piece of these so that way I could wedge in the handle a little bit better? Well, whenever you do that, you're gonna have to sand down the bottom a little bit and the top, because it leaves a little bit of gap in the middle where it was forced inside. So make sure you do that. And then the second thing is, make sure you label your top and bottom, because once I started sanding, I started thinking like, oh man, I can't really tell which one, and it's supposed to go a specific way, so I can't really tell which way is which. Thankfully, I remembered which way mine went because of how light this walnut is. I made mine the bottom, but make sure you label yours so that way you know whenever it comes time to assemble everything that you do it the right way. So let's get back to sanding. After using the bench sander, I moved to the random orbital sander and I sanded everything up to 220 grit. Next, I used the router to add a chamfer all the way around the edge of the mallet and also the handle. For the handle, I just added a chamfer in the middle section, kind of to be like the grip, so I did mark where I wanted the chamfer to start and end, so it would be even all the way around. Okay, so my router skills still aren't the best, as you can see. I have been practicing a little bit, so it is a little bit better than it was in my last video, which if you haven't seen that video, you should go check it out, where I completely going the wrong way with the router. So I will say, something I've learned with the router is you just have to get used to it. Just keep going, keep doing passes on some scrap wood until you get used to what you're doing. For this project, it would have been a whole lot easier if I would have used a router table. I don't have a router table, so I just used the hand router, and it was okay. But if you have access to a router table, it might make your life a lot easier. So the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna sand up some of the areas where I messed up with the router, try to cover them up a little bit, and then I'm gonna try to assemble the mallet. Assembling the mallet was probably the easiest part and the most fun. What you need to do is put your handle in place where it's going to be, and then add your wedges and then pound them in place, and that's about it. After that, I used the flush cut trim saw just to get the excess wood off, and then I went back in with the random orbital sander again to clean up the top part there where I made some marks from the saw, and then after that it was time to add finish. I used Danish oil to finish this mallet. It's really what I had on hand, but it's something that I use a lot, mainly because I think it looks the best on walnut. So there were a lot of things that I learned in making this router from the first time I made it to the second time I made it. A couple differences are, the first one I didn't use a router on the handle, and I'm really glad that I did that for this one. It made a big difference in gripping it. The second thing is I didn't use a router on the mallet head for the first one, and I did on the second. That also made a difference. It definitely looks a lot better. One thing I didn't do on the second that I did on the first is the first time I added a shelf on the handle, so that way when you put the handle in the mallet head, it kind of stuck in one place and it didn't just go all the way through. I didn't do that on this one. That's because I glued up my mallet head before I made my handle. So next time I'm going to make my handle and then my mallet head. That way I can measure it out the correct way. I can't tell you that rotating these inside pieces made all that much of a difference, but I was able to put the wedges in a lot further than I did on my first mallet. So I hope it doesn't pull out. I don't know if you can see the gap there. There is a gap there where the handle goes into the mallet head, and I'm not crazy about that gap. And I also didn't get as tight of a fit with the handle that I wanted. So at some point this might come out. I'm sure once it gets dry in the winter, maybe it will loosen up a little bit. But it was all a learning experience. I'll do that different next time. If this video helped you out, hit that like button. Then also, if you haven't already, subscribe to my channel. If this is your first time watching one of my videos, thank you for watching. Check out some of my other project videos. I've got a lot of different types of things that I've made. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next project.